And we're live. Um, all right, so this is interesting. This is my first hangout. Actually, I did a playing around hangout with Billy Gregory, who is the other half of the Viking and the Lumberjack. And Billy and I played around with it, and I thought I'd be smart and I would do one of these with Hangouts and for Tenon, and then look what happened. My Google Apps account tricked me. So let me go over here and I'm going to share my screen. So there is a chat toolbox in there, or comments or something like that. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that along the way, we'll do that. I'm assuming everybody can hear me. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So this is the Tenon homepage. Hopefully you are aware of that. If any of you aren't Tenon users, that's okay, because I'm going to go through the entire process of logging in and all that stuff. Which is I'm going to log in. This is a fresh account, a completely fresh account, and it's my test account. So this is what you see when you first log in and when you first create an account. And then I come in here at the bottom and annoy you and ask you to upgrade. So for a lot of people, one of the things that they need to do first, they need to get their API key. We have a lot of people who use external plugins like Joe Dolson's Access Monitor, for instance. And Joe Dolson's Access Monitor requires you to enter your key. So one of the things that we get a lot of people asking questions about is, where do I get my key? It's labeled here on the left, and it says API key. So you can just go there, you get your key, and then you can use that with any of the third-party tools that exist out there. The Grunt plugin, the Gulp plugin, the Open Scholar plugin, like I said, Access Monitor, any of those sorts of things. But let me go over the user interface a little bit really quickly to get everybody familiar with the Tenon user interface. So the dashboard is where you go when you first log in. And it's going to contain a high-level overview of your performance across all of your different projects and all the pages you've tested. And as we see here, this is a brand new account, so there's no information on it. History would be a running log of all the history of all the tests that you've done, and so that is so that's good. And then then we have projects. Projects would be a list of our projects. We're going to go over that. Profile is your profile. You can add your name. So I'll add my name here, Joe Schmo, and I can't type. And it gives you also some information about your account. It'll give you your progress. So right here it says you've used 0 of your plans, 50 calls, of course, because this is, like I said, brand new account. Notifications gives us a list of the notifications of all the emails that we've sent. Passwords, where you change your password. Address is your address. And then I'm going to go through here for settings and API settings and applications. So settings are going to be basic profile settings, okay? So this has your date format. You can choose any of these optional date formats for any of the information you have. Your time zone, so it'll localize to you, to whatever your time zone is. How long you want your timeout to be, your session timeout, up to a full 30 days. Your number format, and of course you can subscribe or unsubscribe to the mailing list here. I would say that I recommend, if you don't want mailing list stuff, that's cool, but subscribe to the updates, because this is where we give information about system updates, change logs, stuff like that. Next, I'm going to get to the API settings, because these are really, really important. If I go to localhost Tenon.io documentation, there's some documentation here about the API itself. Now, admittedly, right now the documentation is only for the API, and we don't have a lot of documentation on the the website interface, which is unfortunate, but that's one of the things we hope to beef up here in the next quarter. But throughout this, what we're going to have is we're going to have some information on the request parameters. So the request parameters are going to be listed here, and they're described in long, boring API documentation style format. But I'm going to go through some of these because these are going to be really important for customizing your settings. One of the things that's really interesting about Tenon is these two request parameters here, certainty and priority. What's cool about Tenon is that we try to avoid false positives. They're sort of the bane of accessibility testing tools, and you can go to the WebAIM list all the way back to 2003, and you'll hear people talking about these things called false positives. And a false positive is anywhere where the product creates a result that's inaccurate based on context or whatever. And so we're particularly sensitive to that. And we don't want to create false positives. That doesn't mean we're perfect, but it means that we're very sensitive to it, and we want to try to avoid it if at all possible. And so we create this thing called a certainty score, and it's basically a subjective interpretation of how certain we are that something is an actual issue or not. Okay, so something that has 100% certainty, it means the tool is 100% certain that we have an actual issue. Again, let's say something like an alt attribute. A missing alt attribute would be something that we have 100% certainty on. We know for a fact that there's 100% certainty on something like that. Other things, maybe not so much. For instance, we've disabled it. We had a test here that looked for implicit headings, and the implicit heading would be something that had bolded text, and the only sub tag in there would be bolded text, but that only had a 20% certainty. And as a matter of fact, we found in practice that it was creating so many false positives we disabled the test altogether. Anyway, what's cool about this is you can set your default settings here to only test for anything that has 100% certainty, and that way you would know without a doubt everything that Tenon had found would be certain. Now this is definitely the kind of setting you would want to use under two important scenarios. The first scenario would be something where there's you're using in a continuous integration, right? So in a continuous integration scenario, you would be looking to fail a build for accessibility problems. So you wouldn't want false positives in there. You'd want to set it to 100 so you didn't get any false positives. Another scenario would be if your team was new to accessibility. The problem with tools like this is that people tend to believe their results on their face without any further scrutiny. And that's great. I mean, if you think about it, why would you want to pay for a tool that didn't have, a high degree of reliability? The reality, though, is sometimes the tools do create false positives, and we need to avoid those. So in that case, if you were brand new to accessibility, or your team was brand new, set it to 100 until they get their feet wet, till they start getting an understanding of it. The next one is priority. And priority is also important, and this uses a proprietary algorithm that I developed that takes into consideration a number of factors to help to rank some of the accessibility issues, and it ranks them on a per test basis. And so what happens is, every time a test run runs, we get all of our results, and then the priority algorithm ranks each one of those things according to a bunch of things like ease and speed of repair, impact on the interface, impact on the user, and so on. And so this, again, is 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100. And so you could say that something that had 100% certainty would be the kind of thing that had a high impact on the user and a very easy repair that had no impact on the interface. So again, alt attributes for images would be really high, right? Because it doesn't impact the interface at all. It does have a high impact on the user, and so it's going to have a higher priority. In practice, you probably don't want to set this any higher than 80. What we've seen historically throughout our data is that you will see a lot of things hovering around that 80 mark, and maybe even between 60 and 80. And so you'll see a lot of important things set there, sort of hovering around there. And so you want to set it here at your maximum would be about 60, I think. This one, this fragment parameter, tells us whether or not what you're testing is a part of a page rather than an entire page. And this is kind of important because this tells certain tests to run or to not run. So, remember, in this case, we're talking about our profile settings, so you're probably going to want to say no here. But if you knew, for instance, that you're only going to be using, say, the Grunt plugin, and you were going to be testing partials or template files, you may want to select yes, but for the most part, you wouldn't want to do that. Importance goes into the prioritization algorithm, and so you could say everything that you're testing has a high high importance by selecting 3. Generally speaking, you'd want to do this on a per project basis, though. The last couple of ones are probably a lot more easy to understand. The default level is whether you want to test for WCAG A, AA, and AAA. I have a blog post on my own website about understanding WCAG level. And I heartily recommend that people read this blog post before just simply wanting to select AAA only. The reason why is because the levels here are not directly, they don't directly correlate to importance. The way that WCAG 1 was, they had a priority level, and it was basically based on user impact. In WCAG 2, they changed things around a little bit, and so you still will find things that I would consider easy to fix and important for accessibility in level AA. Now, if you're in an organization that's concerned only about compliance, then historically the legal compliance level that is mandated most accessibility settlements is level AA. So, you know, I wouldn't blame you if you chose that, but leave it at AA for a little bit. You may find some things that you'd like to fix that are AAA. These last 2 radio button sets here are reference info and store results. So basically, in reference info, do you want reference information to be returned in your results? And I would suggest yes, especially if you're new to accessibility. Store results, whether you want the system to store results, that's a yes or no. By default, it's going to say yes. And the reason why you would want to do that, of course, is so you can get access to archived test results. User agent string is going to be the browser user agent string that you want to have returned in your results. This doesn't do anything magical as far as testing is concerned. It would be more of a case of if you had a system that was sniffing for user agents, you may want to have one that passed through here. And then the last 2 are going to be viewport width and viewport height. So Tenon is actually DOM aware. And what I mean by DOM aware is it tests in a headless browser and is fully aware of any changes to the DOM with JavaScript, and also sizing of things based on the viewport. So for instance, let's say you wanted to test your responsive designs, you could actually pass through your breakpoints into these settings, and you would get results based upon those viewport changes being made. The default ones is 1024 by 768. We use that because there are lots of people with low vision who tend to use resolutions about that size, and so we do some testing based on viewport sizes and stuff like that, and so we use that setting. You can put whatever you want in there. And then default delay is really fun. If you have any JavaScript that takes a while to load, let's say you have a whole bunch of JavaScript that gets loaded from a CDN, or you have ads that display, or anything else that modifies the DOM after a couple seconds, you can put that delay in there in terms of milliseconds. So 2,000 seconds would be 2 seconds, and that would be your default delay. I leave that blank because, again, this is my profile setting, and so I'm going to set this, and this is set globally for me now. And every time that I do testing, if I don't change any of these settings, then it'll run under these defaults. And as a matter of fact, now that I've done that, I'm actually go here and set that to 60. So that's my default settings. Now what's cool now is if I go into my projects and I want to create a new project, and so I've clicked that project link down the left, and I'm going to click here. It says Add New Project. What's going to happen is if I scroll down here to Project Settings, this project has inherited all my settings from before. So let me go ahead and create a project. And this project is going to be called Fortune 500. And I can give it a name. And this is called the Fortune 500 Homepages. I can give it a description. This is a project to test Fortune pages. And then I'm going to go here. Let's see. That's not what I wanted. What this is going to do is going to give me I have this list stored up. So what's really cool is if you know every single URL of your site, you can totally just dump a list of URLs in there. So I have this text area here says add, remove URLs for testing. I'm just going to paste those in there. You can actually paste any amount of gibberish in there, and what it'll do is strip out the URLs, so you don't have to do one every line or any of that sort of stuff. But you can put them in there. Next is, do I want to test these URLs now? And of course, I'm going to say yes. That's almost always going to be yes, and so I'm going to say yes. Do I want to monitor these URLs? So this is really cool. What will happen is Tenon will periodically check to see if any of those pages that I've put in here have changed, and if they have changed, it'll retest them. Unfortunately, it's not a terribly intelligent test for changes. In other words, if you do a lot of A/B testing, or if you have ads that get displayed or something like that, it'll retest them because what it's doing is determining whether the DOM of the page has changed, and of course under A/B testing or advertising, of course that would have changed, so it would trigger the retest. But you can monitor the URLs doing that, and then here's all of our same identical settings from before. But finally down here is, do you want to set this as your default project? I'm going to say no here, but I'm going to describe exactly what your default project does after that. So if you notice, when I first got here to this project's dashboard, I already had a project here. It's called a default project. And as a matter of fact, you always must have one default project, because at the request time, if you don't have a project as part of your request, it'll just dump it into the default project. And so that's exactly what this thing does. If you see at the very top, this Analyze Now thing will actually allow me to run a test. And doing that will allow me to analyze a page now, and it goes into the default project, and I've tested this page and gotten my results. So this gives me a good opportunity to go ahead and show you guys what the test results look like. Now keep in mind that the website, the Tenon website that we've been looking at this entire time, is actually just a client of the API. So as a matter of fact, if I go here and I go to Postman, and if you don't know Postman, it's a really awesome tool. If I go here to Postman, and I enter my key, which is here, and then I enter a URL, and I enter http://google.com. I'm going to do the request here, and I'm going to get my results. So this is the JSON format that you're going to get from the API, and so this page here is just a prettified version of that JSON format. We have only put a limited amount of the data in here, so I'm going to go through and show you all the other nifty stuff in the JSON format. But let's face it, looking at JSON isn't really terribly exciting. So it gives us our stored test results, and then we have a couple things we can do. First is we can just download a CSV. So this gives you a CSV that you can use. If you're a QA analyst, you can log into your bug tracking system and attach the CSV and say, here's all the issues from testing this page. Or you can, you can test multiple and get all the information there. So we have here our stored test results that's coming from the JSON request. At the top is how many issues were found, the URL, and some other information about the page size and so on. We get a graph here. The left graph shows us the number of tests that were run and how many passed and how many failed. So we see here that we have had 7 tests failed out of 62. And in this graph here is a pie chart that shows us the relative amount of failures from the results that we got. And I don't know how in the heck that I did this with this Zoom business here, but I'm going to go ahead and close that. I hate when I do that. Slash dashboard. There we go. Matter of fact, let's take a look now at my history. I can go back in the history and I can view my results. So back to the results here. This is the result list in this table here, and the result list has two important things on the left. The first one here is, of course, the code snippet that we found that had the accessibility problem. So this is the actual HTML from the DOM, and so this trips people up sometimes because they go, "Hey, that's not in my page," and then they find out that JavaScript or something else has injected it. The next thing that's really important here is the test ID. This says test ID 9. I want you to keep very close attention to this, because if you ever are using Tenon and you find a result that you disagree with and that you think is bogus, you think it's a false positive, you think it's not really an error, I want you to do one very important thing for me. Tell me the test ID and tell me why you think it wasn't an issue. Because again, we really care about false positives and stuff, and if it's bogus to you, it's probably bogus to somebody else, and we need to hear about it. The next thing that we're going to see here on the right-hand side under the description column is going to be a lot of the information about the issue itself. First off, whether it's an error or not, and we say errors and warnings are going to be shown here, and so how do we determine that? Well, we determine that anything with 80% certainty and above is going to be an error, and anything below 80% certainty is going to be a warning. It's kind of arbitrary. Some people would say 100% or not, but we think that these need to be called out as errors if they're 80% and above, because there's only rare chances that they're not actual errors. The next one is the priority score, and again, remember I said that each of these priority scores are normalized. And they're normalized against all the other issues on the page. So this one is probably the highest. It's got a priority of 95. I doubt we're going to see 100 on here. Maybe. Oh, there it is. Yeah. So there's our 100. Let me describe why this is 100, because it's got blank link text. Now there is a title attribute on that, but the title attribute's not visible to people who have motor control problems who use something like Dragon. But we also give you the line number and the column number, so this is on line 11 in the source, and then we have the text here for what the issue is. And if we go, let me go up to one of these here, and if we click on recommended fix, this actually takes you to a full best practice entry for this. So it says provide all attributes for image elements. It gives us a description. It gives us a description of the test itself, and it gives us the remediation guidance. Now this one is pretty sparse. Add an alt attribute for image elements, but so that could be fleshed out a little bit. But here's our prioritization information. So it tells us we have a user impact that's high, repair speed that's high, impact on the interface is none, and so on. And that's the raw score. And then again, that got normalized to 95%. But we also have our code samples. So the first one is the bad code example. and the next one is the good code example, and then other information about the standards and guidelines and all that reference information that comes along with this. So I heartily recommend perusing the recommended fix. The recommended fix is information is, some of it's a little bit of a cobbler's child at the moment, where we need to beef that up. If you find one that you say is that's not clear, it's not complete, I wanted more information, shoot me this link here at the top. Just shoot me the link for it, and I will be sure to take a look and see what I can do to make it easier to understand. All right, so here's, let me go back to our projects. So our projects here, projects are listed here, and if I go here to default project, it'll take me to the dashboard for that project. So let me go over a lot of these things here. First off, the top information, the summary information, gives us a listing of all the pages that were tested. So right now, of course, I only have one distinct page. So it's one distinct URLs that were tested. It gives me the successful versus unsuccessful. The reason why you want to know unsuccessful is you want to know if you've had any problems with some of your tests not working right. Sometimes we have people try to test stuff behind a firewall that's not actually possible, and so if they have a high amount of unsuccessful ones, then we might want to give them some help. Gives us average errors per page, average warnings over here on the right, average issues, average certainty, and average priority. Down here we have two graphs for the number of issues per kilobyte and the distribution of density. Let me log into the main website, main tenant website, with my admin account, because it'll give you a better understanding of the of what these things really look like. So that's what these really look like. Is this is going to be a line chart. This one, when it loads up, is going to be a bar chart. This is much more realistic depiction of information here. We use issues per kilobyte of source code because that's a little bit more of a realistic description of the status of the website. Meaning, if you had a page that was 10 kilobytes that had 10 issues, you'd have 100% density, versus if it was 100 kilobytes of source and had 10 issues, it'd be much lower. And so density is a better performance indicator than raw issue count. So we have this trend graph here, and then we have the bar chart. So these are the number of pages that had 0, all the way up to the number of pages that had 100%. So as a just a quick glance, the more of the bars that are on the left that are taller, the better you're doing. If you get these last three here getting really tall, that particular project or that site performs particularly poorly. Down here we'll see this is the worst performing pages there. This is an important one. This is duplicate issues. Now the duplicate issues table is an indication of how many times we've found the exact issue in your pages. So at a meta level, you know, when we're in this situation, we're looking at all of our projects. That's not terribly useful because we're looking at all of our projects and it's not a good indicator. But if you had selected a single project and then you started seeing a bunch of duplicate issues, then you would notice, okay, that there's a lot of patterns that we're repeating that we should stop doing. And so these are, again, like I said, duplicate issues. And when I say that, I mean the same exact issue using the same exact source code located in the same exact spot. What I usually tell people is, imagine I'm on the CNN site, and this CNN search box thing, this little search affordance that they have, let's say there was an accessibility problem with that. Now if we scan 10,000 pages on CNN.com, we would see 10,000 instances of that issue. Well, that's silly. It's only one place in the code, and so that's what we'd be looking at here. We could explore what's going on there and find out what those are, and then we can make a big, broad, important fix across the site. So those are our duplicate issues. And then below that, we're going to have issues by test ID. And this shows us the specific issues that have the count for each issue as well. So these are not the most common issues. These are actually all of our issues. And we can sort by this and determine which ones have the highest incidence. And so by percentage, the blank link text is the most frequent issue that we have in our site, on down to duplicate IDs and so on and so forth. And again, this is a good indicator at an organization level of what practices we need to stop, right? And then down here, wait, that was the duplicate. Sorry, these are the issues by test ID. There we go. And then down here is going to be the issues by success criteria. Now you'll notice here that some of these rows are grayed out. They're in a disabled state because we don't test for these things. And this is one of the most important things that people who are new to accessibility testing need to know, and that is accessibility testing tools cannot find all of your issues. And if you look at some of these, and if you're familiar with WCAG, you'll see that it's pretty obvious. For instance, there's no way for 1.2.9, there's no way in the world for an accessibility testing tool to tell you whether you're meeting the requirement for audio only information that's live. In other words, what they're looking for is if you have audio only information that's playing live, do you have a proper alternative, which would be in most cases some sort of caption or live transcript. And so the testing tool is not going to do that. And so there's a listing of all the ones that we do test, as well as how often we've found issues with those, how many distinct issues we have, and what the percentages are of those. And so we go through here, and you can actually download a CSV of that information. So this is at a high level all of our information on the website itself. But let's talk about some of the other things that you can do. For one thing, the API itself is, as I mentioned before, extremely powerful. The website itself is a client of the API, and so this is what our API response looks like. And if you're not familiar with JSON, that's okay. But you'll see here that a lot of this same information is that we saw in the user interface is here, but we do have a couple of other bits and pieces that can be used and added to this. So this is great. How can we use this? Well, you can use it in Joe Dolson's Access Monitor. So if I go to a11ybuzz.com, Joe Dolson has done a really awesome job of creating a plugin that goes into a WordPress website, and so you can hit this button to do a accessibility check. If we go to our posts and we go in here to let's take a look at this, and we have a post here that we want to check. Joe's done a great job here. You just go ahead and it'll check the page itself. It'll check the information in your post, and so it's going to see here that there are 2 unlabeled form fields and unlabeled image. So if I run the check, it's going to go out and get the results, and here you go. It tells us the post may not be published because it doesn't meet our minimum requirements, and it'll give us the information right there. And let's say you are let's say you're a user, you're a developer. You can go into use this as a grunt plugin. So if I go to here, this is a grunt tenon demo. Now I'm going to go through some of these. If you're not a grunt user, it's pretty awesome. I've vacillated a little bit between going from grunt to gulp and back to grunt personally, but this is great because what this does is we can run a bunch of different checks on our code, and so I use almost always I'll use this task, which is Jas Hint. Let me see if I can't zoom in on PhP Storm. Jas Hint is great because it does a quick syntax check your JavaScript files, and I love that because it helps me from making boneheaded mistakes that I have to fix later. JSON lint lets me it'll run a linting, checking of my configuration files, so on and so forth. And then there's other things I can do with Tenon itself. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show the Tenon task. Now this was done by, I think this one was done by Ed Gossi, and if I mispronounced Ed's name, I apologize. But Ed created this Grunt Tenon client, and so this is the Grunt plugin that uses Tenon itself as a client, and it lets you run the checking on your pages as you develop them. So what I can do is I can give a source of a folder full of source files, and it will test them. Simple as that. So if I have my project here, and here's my source files, I have the regular old website, right? I have my CSS and all my other assets carved out here, and I can give it a configuration file, tenon rc. So if you recall from earlier, the API settings that we had talked about before, the certainty and the priority and all that sort of stuff, we can put those here, which is cool. The other thing that Ed did was he created a filter. So in other words, if we have some tests from Tenon that we don't like, you can filter them out by putting their test ID here, and it'll ignore them. Okay. And then the other thing that I can do is you can actually run your configurations inside of the task itself. And so we have this is the whole Tenon task here. In this case, this is going to test them all under our default settings. But if I wanted to do responsive testing of my phone, my iPhone responsive design, I could put that there and put that for here for the tablet. And so check this out. I am going to go to terminal, and I'm just going to run grunt Tenon. What that's going to do is that's going to go out to the Tenon web service. It's going to get the results, and it's going to test all these pages, and then give me all the information about them. And eventually, when it's done, it's going to bark at me and tell me how many issues it found, and so on. There we go. So the task failed, and of course that's the problem, is that we've failed our task and we've got our issues. One of the things that I've done is I've commented out the files to save it, but he also has a task here where you can save all the JSON responses into this file here. Another thing you could do though is there is a number of other plugins that are out there that use Tenon, and so one of those is this one called Tenon Reporters from Justin Stockton. So one of the things that you could do is it'll return HTML. It'll be a fancy little HTML page. XUnit, which is if you're using Jenkins or Hudson for your continuous integration, it'll do that. And then I think he's got CSV in here as well. But so what you could do is actually, instead of putting it here, you could pipe that through somehow to one of these reporters or something like that. Another thing that I've added to this, though, is there's another thing that we've done, and that is I can add it as a grunt watch task. So anytime my HTML files change, Tenon will test it. Another thing I did is I added it as a Git hook. So as a pre-commit hook, it will run inside of here as a Git hook and kick back if there's any problems. So like I said, there's a number of other node modules here. This is the API client that Ed built both his Gulp plugin and his Grunt plugin on. This is the node module that Justin wrote for his reporters, and this is another Grunt Tenon, which is done with done by a guy named Andrew over at Razorfish. This is a protractor testing plugin and it also uses tenon. And finally, grunt tenon inline was done by one of our developers. And what's cool about this is what the tenon inline task will do is it will inline all your assets. So let's say you had you wanted to test your CSS. Well, it would inline the CSS file into the HTML files. So so you get that final rendered DOM test of the page during the testing. And then let's see Travis. So the other thing that I did, .org? I think it's .org. Yeah, there we go. So here is the grunt tenon demo. So what I did was I added this to Travis CI, which is a continuous integration tool, and I created my Travis file here. And so here's my Travis file, and basically it installs on my node modules, and installs on my Bower dependencies, and then it runs the grunt task. And here's my output. So we have all of these individual specific workflows covered, right? We have the website handles our QA engineers, or any of our maybe compliance folks who want to do testing, but they don't want to get their hands dirty with any of the API stuff. Our QA engineers can use the API and tie that into any of their stuff if they run grunt tasks, or any of those sorts of things. As a matter of fact, let's see, I can actually go into I can actually run this as part of Selenium as well. I'm running out of time, so if this takes too long, I'm going to bag it. Desk. Selenium sample. Here we go. So, oh. Oh, okay. There we go. Dang it. All right, so I'm going to bag that. But anyway, the Selenium example actually is, I have that on YouTube, I think. And Carl Groves. Maybe not. All right, so we'll bag that. We got 10 minutes left. There's one more thing I want to do, and that is to talk a little bit about testing only pieces of code. Now, you can simply grab a piece of code from one of your sites, or one of your pages, and test that. Okay, you just copy that, paste that in there. It'll automatically determine whether you have code or a page in there, and it'll test them. So one of the things that we have a challenge with right now is how to test things that require authentication, and how to test things that are behind a firewall or something like that. So right now, that's pretty much it. Is you're going to grab the piece of code, you're going to come in here, and you're going to analyze it. We're working on a couple of things now, and this leads me into a segue of the roadmap for Tenon. And the roadmap for Tenon is pretty exciting. We have a couple of things that we're getting ready to release in the relative near future. Thankfully, Christmas vacation for work actually affords me more time to do some of these things. So the first exciting thing that we're going to have is a reports API. So all of this information that you see here, you'll be able to actually go and grab from a reports API. You just pass it your API key. You can optionally pass in your start date and end date, and then the type of report you want. So if the type of report you want was the information here in the summary, you just pass in the type of summary, and you get that JSON. So you can integrate that into any other reporting dashboards that you may have. So some sort of business intelligence stuff you can pass in. Oh, you can also pass the project name as well. The next thing that we're working on is a projects API. So right now, the only externally facing API that we have is the test API. But what you will be able to do is you will be able to create a new project, and then you will be able to submit tests against that project immediately as well. So, for instance, if you were going to do, let's go back to our Travis example, right? If you wanted to create a new project for every single build, then you could do that. So you create that new project with the API. Then you run your build that does the automatic testing, and then that information is returned back to you in your tests, or you can get at it from the dashboard. That's also going to include a spider. Generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of spiders. I think of them as sort of a very broad hammer that you're going to smack something with. At the same time, there are people who work on websites that have massive amounts of content being added all the time, and so how do you monitor that kind of stuff? Well, a spider is really your only choice if you have all this content being added from outside of your development environment, say through content management system. So that's another big fun thing that Asa and I are working feverishly on right now. And so that'll be done very shortly. Then another thing that's going to happen is, for those of you who want to test on your development environment, but you can't expose that development environment to the outside world, we're actually adding a tunnel. It's going to be called Tenon Tunnel, and if you watch on our GitHub repositories, you may notice it when it comes up. But the tunnel is going to allow you to create a reverse tunnel, an SSH tunnel connection. It's a single connection between you and the Tenon API. And what's really cool about that is you create the tunnel, you run your tests, and when you're done running the test, that connection is killed off immediately. So that connection will never be reused. That resource dies immediately and is gone forever. So that's another really important feature. If you've ever used anything like ngrok or localtunnel.me, it's exactly the same kind of thing. The only difference is it's authenticated directly from your specific API key. So if you don't have a key, you can't even connect to this. So we don't even have any sort of issues with outsiders just connecting to the service. That is it. And I know this is a lot of information that was getting dumped all at once. I'm going to actually have future webinars in the coming weeks that are going to be specific to a specific type of task. So for anybody who uses Joe Dolson's Access Monitor, we'll be doing a webinar for that. For the grunt and gulp stuff, we'll be doing a webinar for that. For Selenium, any of that sort of stuff. The last thing I'll leave you with is, if anybody's interested in collaborating on one of these things, let's say a plugin for Atom or Sublime Text or something like that, absolutely, positively enthusiastic about supporting things like that. Our goal with Tenon is to facilitate testing wherever you do your work. We don't believe in the idea of having to go to an external product to do that. So as often and as well integrated into your products that you already use for your day-to-day work, that's where we want to be. So that's going to be it for me. A number of you submitted questions ahead of time for what you'd like to see in here. If you haven't, or if I haven't answered those, or if I've just created more questions for you, let me know. maybe what I'll do is I'll do a pre-recorded answer and post that on YouTube as well. This one will be, as soon as I'm done with it, it's going to get uploaded to YouTube, but I'm not going to publish it until it's fully captioned. So I will caption that. I anticipate the length of time for that to be about a week, I think. But I will email everybody who attended and let them know about where that is. And I just want to thank you all for showing up, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.